Elizabeth II reigned as monarch of the United Kingdom and other Commonwealth states from 6 February 1952 until her death in 2022. She was born on April 21, 1926, in Mayfair, London. Throughout her life, she served as the Queen Regnant of 32 independent nations, and at the time of her death, she was still the ruler of 15 realms. Her over 70-year reign is the longest of any British monarch in history, as well as the longest confirmed reign of a female head of state. Elizabeth was the first child of Prince Albert, Duke of York, later King George VI, and his wife, Elizabeth, Duchess of York, later Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and was born during the reign of her paternal grandfather, King George V. When her brother, Edward VIII, abdicated the monarchy in 1936, her father assumed the throne, making the 10-year-old Princess Elizabeth the presumed heir. She received a private home education before starting to serve in the Auxiliary Territorial Service during the Second World War. She wed Philip Mountbatten, a former Prince of Greece and Denmark, in November 1947. Their union lasted for 73 years until he passed away in 2021. Edward, Anne, Andrew, and Charles were their 4 children. When her father passed away in February 1952, Elizabeth succeeded him as head of the Commonwealth and Queen of 7 sovereign Commonwealth nations: the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Pakistan, and Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. Through significant political transitions, including the Troubles in Northern Ireland, devolution in the UK decolonization of Africa, and the UK's membership in the European communities, and exit from the European Union, Elizabeth ruled as a constitutional monarch. Her realms changed in number throughout time as other lands attained independence, and some realms established republics. In her several domains, Elizabeth had more than 170 prime ministers at her disposal. Elizabeth was crowned in 1953 and in 1977, 2002, 2012, and 2022. Consecutively, she celebrated her silver, golden, diamond, and platinum jubilees. Although she occasionally encountered Republican sentiment and media criticism of her family, support for the British monarchy and her popularity were constant throughout her life. Charles III, Elizabeth's eldest son, succeeded her when she passed away at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire, Scotland, in September 2022 at the age of 96. When Britain entered the Second World War, in September 1939, Lord Hailsham recommended that Princesses Elizabeth and Margaret be moved to Canada to prevent the frequent Luftwaffe aerial raids on London. Their mother, however, opposed this idea, saying the kids wouldn't go without her. Up until Christmas 1939, the princesses resided at Scotland's Balmoral Castle before relocating to Norfolk Sandringham House. They stayed in Royal Lodge in Windsor from February to May of 1940 before relocating to Windsor Castle, where they spent most of the following 5 years. Elizabeth addressed other kids who had been evacuated from the cities in her first radio transmission, which she made in 1940 as part of the BBC's Children's Hour. She said that, in addition to trying to shoulder their fair share of the peril and sorrow of war, they were also attempting to assist their brave sailors, soldiers, and airmen. Elizabeth made her first solo public appearance in 1943 while visiting the Grenadier Guards, where she had been made colonel the year before. For her to serve as one of the 5 counselors of state in the event of her father's disability or absence abroad, such as during his trip to Italy in July 1944, Parliament altered the statute as she got closer to turning 18 years old. She was given the service number 230,873 and was made an honorary second subaltern in the Auxiliary Territorial Service in February 1945. 5 months after receiving her training and employment as a driver and mechanic, she was promoted to the rank of Honorary Junior Commander. On Victory in Europe Day, which marked the conclusion of the European War, Elizabeth and Margaret mingled covertly with the revelers in the streets of London. Plans were made during the war to ally Elizabeth more closely with Wales, to stifle Welsh nationalism. For a variety of reasons, including Elizabeth's dread of being associated with conscientious objectors in the Eard, proposals to make her the Constable of Caernarfon Castle, or a patron of Eard Gobeith Cymra, the Welsh League of Youth, were dropped. On the day of her 18th birthday, Welsh MPs proposed that she be named Princess of Wales, but the king rejected the idea because he believed that such a title belonged only to the bride of a Prince of Wales, and that the Prince of Wales had always been the heir presumptive. In 1947, Elizabeth traveled with her parents through southern Africa on her first international trip. She made the following commitment in a broadcast to the British Commonwealth on the occasion of turning 21. "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and the service of our great imperial family, to which we all belong." At their Westminster Abbey wedding on November 20, 1947, Elizabeth and Philip were presented with 2,500 wedding presents from all across the world. The fabric for Elizabeth's Norman Hartnell-created gown had to be purchased with ration coupons. To purchase the fabric for her Norman Hartnell-designed gown, the couple had to wait for ration coupons. Princess Anne was born in August 1950, while Elizabeth's second child, Charles, was born in November 1948. In the months following their nuptials, the couple rented Windlesham Moor, a property close to Windsor Castle, until July 1949, when they moved into Clarence House in London. The Duke of Edinburgh served as a serving Royal Navy officer when stationed in the British Crown colony of Malta between 1949 and 1951. They spent sporadic periods in Malta, staying at Villa Gardamangia, the rented residence of Philip's uncle Lord Mountbatten, in the village of Guardamana. Their 2 kids stayed in the UK. In 1951, as George VI's health deteriorated, Elizabeth frequently filled in for him at official gatherings. Elizabeth and Philip left the British territory of Kenya in the early spring of 1952 to go to Australia and New Zealand. The news of Elizabeth's father's passing reached Elizabeth on February 6. The new queen, who opted to keep Elizabeth as her regal name and became known as Elizabeth II, was informed of the news by Philip. The royal party hastily returned to the United Kingdom. With Elizabeth's succession, it appeared likely that the royal family would adopt her husband's name in keeping with the tradition of the time for married women. Philip proposed the name House of Edinburgh in honor of his ducal title, while Lord Mountbatten argued for the House of Mountbatten. Elizabeth's grandmother Queen Mary and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill supported keeping the House of Windsor together. On April 9, 1952, Elizabeth declared that Windsor would remain the royal house. Princess Margaret told her sister she wanted to wed Peter Townsend, a divorcee, 16 years, Margaret's senior, with 2 boys from his first marriage, as they were making preparations for the coronation. Elizabeth requested that they wait a year, but major politicians opposed the union, and the Church of England forbade remarriage following divorce. In 1960, Margaret decided to break off her engagement to Townsend and wed Anthony Armstrong Jones, who was made the Earl of Snowdon the following year. She did not remarry after their divorce in 1978. Despite Queen Mary's passing on 24 March 1953, the coronation took place on 2 June as scheduled. Except for the anointing and communion, the ceremony at Westminster Abbey was broadcast on television for the first time. The floral symbols of the Commonwealth nations were embroidered on Elizabeth's coronation robe. The reign of Elizabeth II was a crucial turning point in the evolution of the British Empire into the Commonwealth of Nations. She assumed leadership of several independent republics and set off on a 7-month global tour, stopping in 13 nations and traveling more than 40,000 km by land, 64,000 km by land, sea, and air. She was the most traveled head of state throughout her reign, making hundreds of state visits to other nations and tours of the Commonwealth. Sir Anthony Eden and Guy Mollet, the British and French prime ministers, spoke about the prospect of France entering the Commonwealth in 1956. The idea was never adopted, and the European Economic Community, the forerunner of the European Union, was founded by the Treaty of Rome, which France signed the following year. Britain and France launched an invasion of Egypt in November 1956 in an unsuccessful effort to seize control of the Suez Canal. Eden disputes Lord Mountbatten's claim that Elizabeth opposed the invasion. Elizabeth was the most traveled head of state throughout her reign, making hundreds of state trips to other nations and tours around the Commonwealth. The Suez Crisis and the selection of Eden's successor in 1957 resulted in Elizabeth receiving her first significant personal criticism. Lord Salisbury and Lord Kilmore recommended Elizabeth name Alec Douglas home as the Prime Minister, which she did. Lord Altrincham accused her of being out of touch, but Elizabeth rebuffed their counsel. Elizabeth also traveled to several nations, including Iran, Cyprus, India, Pakistan, and Nepal. When she traveled to Ghana in 1964, she disregarded concerns for her safety, even though President Kwame Nkrumah, who had taken her place as the country's leader, was a target for assassins. Elizabeth's calmness and courage in the face of the violence were commended. As part of a planned transition to self-government, more than 20 countries gained independence from Britain during the 1960s and 1970s, speeding up the decolonization of Africa and the Caribbean. Ian Smith, the Prime Minister of Rhodesia, unilaterally proclaimed the country's independence in 1965 while pledging loyalty and devotion to Elizabeth and referring to her as Queen of Rhodesia. Despite Elizabeth formally dismissing him and the international community imposing sanctions on the country, Smith's regime lasted for more than 10 years. The British government sought admission to the European community as its links to its old empire deteriorated. It was successful in this endeavor in 1973. Elizabeth was the first British monarch to travel to a communist nation when she visited Yugoslavia in October 1972. President Josip Broz Tito met her at the airport, and hundreds of people greeted her in Belgrade. Elizabeth was touring the Austronesian Pacific Rim in February 1974 when Edward Heath, the British Prime Minister, persuaded her to call an election, forcing her to fly home. Elizabeth requested Harold Wilson, the leader of the opposition and a member of the Labour Party, to form a government after the election ended in a hung parliament. After the opposition-controlled Senate rejected Whitlam's budget proposals, a year later, at the height of the 1975 Australian constitutional crisis, Governor-General Sir John Kerr removed Whitlam from office. Gordon Scholes, the Speaker, pleaded with Elizabeth to overturn Kerr's judgment, but she denied it, saying she would not interfere with matters left to the Governor-General's discretion under the Australian Constitution. Elizabeth's Silver Jubilee, which commemorated her joining the Commonwealth, was observed in 1977. Despite unfavorable press coverage of Princess Margaret's divorce from Lord Snowdon, the celebrations reaffirmed her popularity. The communist leader of Romania, Nicolae Ceausescu, and his wife, Elena, paid a state visit to the UK in 1978, which Elizabeth tolerated, even though she secretly believed they had blood on their hands. The following year, Anthony Blunt, a former surveyor of the Queen's pictures, was revealed to be a communist spy, and the Provisional Irish Republican Army assassinated her uncle-in-law, Lord Mountbatten. By the end of the 1970s, Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau had little meaning for the crown, Elizabeth was concerned. The elimination of several Canadian royal emblems under Trudeau's administration and his pranks, such as sliding down stairwells at Buckingham Palace and pirouetting behind Elizabeth in 1977, seemed to support his alleged republicanism. Elizabeth was better informed than any of the British politicians or bureaucrats in 1980, according to Canadian lawmakers dispatched to London to negotiate the patriation of the Canadian Constitution. 6 shots were fired at Elizabeth from close range while she was riding Burmese down the Mall in London during the 1981 Trooping the Colour ceremony. The shots were blanks, the police later learned. Marcus Sargent, a 17-year-old attacker, was given a 5-year prison term and released after 3. Many people applauded Elizabeth for maintaining her composure and her expertise in handling her mount. Elizabeth was the target of another assault in October while she was in Dunedin, New Zealand. 17-year-old Christopher John Lewis attempted to shoot the parade while standing on the 5th floor of a building, but his .22 rifle missed the target. He was detained, but was given a 3-year prison term for unlawful possession and discharge of a firearm, rather than being charged with attempted murder or treason. He attempted to escape from a mental health facility 2 years into his sentence to kill Charles, who was touring the nation with Diana and their son, Prince William. The 1980s saw a surge in media interest in the views and personal lives of the royal family, which gave rise to a number of sensational press stories that were first published by the Sun tabloid. According to the Sunday Times, Elizabeth was horrified by rising unemployment, a string of riots, the violence of a miners' strike, and Thatcher's failure to impose sanctions on the apartheid system in South Africa. She was also concerned that Margaret Thatcher's economic policies encouraged social divisions. Thatcher received membership in the Order of Merit and the Order of the Garter as part of Elizabeth's gift when John Major took over as Prime Minister. Elizabeth was a behind-the-scenes force in abolishing apartheid, according to Brian Mulroney, the Canadian Prime Minister from 1984 to 1993. Elizabeth was the first British Queen to visit the People's Republic of China in 1986, when she made a 6-day state visit. The itinerary included stops at the Terracotta Warriors, the Great Wall of China, and the Forbidden City. Elizabeth said that fortunately postal services have improved since 1602, and made a joke about the first British emissary to China being lost at sea with Queen Elizabeth's letter to the Wanli Emperor. Elizabeth was made fun of by younger royal family members on the 1987 charity game program, It's a Royal Knockout, making her the focus of satire by the end of the 1980s. She openly backed divisive Canadian constitutional revisions, drawing condemnation from those who opposed them, notably Pierre Trudeau. Elizabeth supported the efforts of Governor-General Ratu Sirpanaya Ganilo to exercise executive authority and negotiate a settlement during the same year that the elected Fijian government was overthrown in a military coup. Sitiveni Rabuka, the leader of the coup, overthrew Ganilo and proclaimed Fiji a republic. In May 1991, Elizabeth made history by becoming the first British Queen to address a joint session of the U.S. Congress following the coalition's victory in the Gulf War. She referred to 1992 as Horribilis, Latin for horrible year, in 1992. Because of journalistic accounts of Elizabeth's private fortune and stories about adultery and troubled marriages within her extended family, Republican sentiment in Britain had increased. Elizabeth's second son, Prince Andrew, divorced his wife, Sarah, in March, and Mauritius deposed her as head of state. During a royal visit to Germany in October, irate demonstrators in Dresden threw eggs at Elizabeth. In April, Princess Anne divorced Captain Mark Phillips, and in November, Windsor Castle, one of her official residences, caught fire. Elizabeth suffered a broken scaphoid bone in her left wrist in January 1994, when the horse she was riding at Sandringham stumbled and fell. She traveled to Russia for the first time as the reigning British monarch in October 1994. Elizabeth was duped into taking a prank phone in October 1995 by Montreal radio personality Pierre Brassard, who pretended to be Canadian Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. Brassard claimed Elizabeth backed Canadian unity and would attempt to sway Quebec's referendum on proposals to secede from Canada. The following year, further information about Charles and Diana's union was made public. Elizabeth suggested that Charles and Diana get a divorce in a letter she sent to them at the end of December 1995. Diana perished in a traffic collision in Paris in August 1997. On September 5, the day before Diana's funeral, Elizabeth consented to fly back to London to address the nation on live television. Elizabeth and Philip traveled to India on a state visit in October 1997, which included a contentious stop at the scene of the Jallianwala Bay tragedy. "Killer Queen, go back," protesters shouted, as she was called upon to apologize for the conduct of British forces 78 years prior. She and Philip placed a wreath at the Park Monument and observed a 30-second period of quiet, which helped to calm down a lot of the outrage from the people. Elizabeth officially inaugurated the newly constituted legislatures for Wales and Scotland in 1999 as part of the UK's devolution process. The National Assembly for Wales was opened in Cardiff in May, while the Scottish Parliament was inaugurated in Edinburgh in July. Elizabeth celebrated her Golden Jubilee in 2002, the 50th year since her coronation. A tour to her realms, including Jamaica, where the farewell supper was described as memorable after a power outage left King's house in the dark, was held to commemorate the occasion. Every day of the 3-day major Jubilee event in London saw 1 million attendees, with more popular enthusiasm than many journalists had predicted. Elizabeth filed a lawsuit against the Daily Mirror in 2003 for breach of confidentiality and won a restraining order preventing the publication of information taken by a reporter posing as a footman at Buckingham Palace. In addition, the publication contributed £25,000 toward her legal fees. Elizabeth had generally good health throughout her life, although in 2003 she underwent keyhole surgery on both knees and, as a result of a pulled-back muscle, was unable to attend the inauguration of the new Emirates Stadium. Elizabeth was exasperated and frustrated by Tony Blair's policy, according to a May 2007 article in the Daily Telegraph, and worried that the British armed forces would be overworked in Iraq and Afghanistan. According to reports, she admired Blair's attempts to bring about peace in Northern Ireland. Elizabeth was the first British monarch to commemorate a diamond wedding anniversary in November 2007. She went to the first Maundy ceremony that was held outside of England and Wales in 2008. She spoke before the UN General Assembly once more in 2010 while serving as the head of the Commonwealth and Queen of the Commonwealth realms. Elizabeth's Diamond Jubilee in 2012 recognized 60 years as monarch, and festivities were staged across her territories, the larger Commonwealth and beyond, while her children and grandchildren undertook royal tours of other Commonwealth nations on her behalf. She and her husband completed a lengthy trip to the United Kingdom. On June 4, Jubilee lights were lit all around the world, and Queen made history by becoming the first British monarch since George III in 1781 to attend a peacetime cabinet meeting. Elizabeth became the first head of state to inaugurate 2 Olympic Games in 2 different nations when she inaugurated the 2012 Summer Olympics and Paralympics in London. She co-starred with Daniel Craig as James Bond in a short film that was a part of the opening ceremony. She was said to as the most memorable Bond girl yet at the awards ceremony on April 4, 2013, and she was given an honorary BAFTA for her support of the film industry. With a reign that lasted from 2007 to 2015, Elizabeth was the longest reigning British monarch and an important figure in British history. On December 21, 2007, she became the monarch with the longest lifespan, and on September 9, 2015, she was crowned the world's longest reigning queen, regnant, and female head of state. As a result of the passing of King Bhumibol of Thailand on October 13, 2016, and the resignation of Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe on November 21, 2017, she later held the titles of the longest reigning monarch and longest serving head of state. Elizabeth relocated to Windsor Castle during the COVID-19 epidemic as a precaution, canceling public appearances and adhering to a stringent hygienic routine. She donned a mask for the first time in public in October 2021 when making a personal visit to Westminster Abbey's tomb of the unknown warrior. She was immunized against COVID-19 for the first time in January and again in April. Elizabeth became the first British monarch to rule as a widow or widower since Queen Victoria on April 9, 2021, after Prince Philip passed away. In her Christmas show that year, she paid a special tribute to her beloved Philip, who had apparently passed away while she was by her husband's bedside. Elizabeth attended the 47th G7 conference in June and the 2021 state opening of Parliament in May, despite the pandemic. She said on July 5 that the National Health Service in the UK would receive the George Cross in honor of all employees, past and present, from all 4 countries and all disciplines. She started using a walking stick in public appearances in October 2021 for the first time since her surgery in 2004. In retaliation for the Amritsar massacre, 19-year-old Jaswant Singh Chahal killed Elizabeth on Christmas Day, 2021, while residing at Windsor Castle. He entered the gardens using a rope ladder and a crossbow. In 2023, after being detained and arrested under the Mental Health Act, he admitted to attempting to harm or scare the sovereign. In conclusion, Elizabeth's longest reign as a British monarch, her longest reign overall, and the assassination attempt that followed are all significant moments in her life. On February 6, 2022, Elizabeth II will turn 70, which will also be 70 years since the passing of her father. She reaffirmed her dedication to a lifetime of public service by hosting a reception at Sandringham House for retirees, Neighborhood Women's Institute members, and non-profit volunteers. Elizabeth had to cancel 2 virtual audiences later that month after testing positive for COVID-19 and experiencing mild cold-like symptoms. She spent time with her family in Frogmore while donating to the DEC's Ukraine humanitarian appeal. Due to episodic mobility issues, Elizabeth missed the state opening of Parliament in May for the first time in 59 years. She attended the Westminster Abbey service of Thanksgiving for Prince Philip, but was unable to make it to the Royal Maundy service in April or the annual Commonwealth Day service because of episodic mobility problems. She also missed the state opening of Parliament in May for the first time in 59 years. Elizabeth was mostly limited to balcony appearances during the Platinum Jubilee festivities and missed the national service of Thanksgiving. She participated in the opening sketch with Paddington Bear at the gathering in front of Buckingham Palace. On June 13, she surpassed King Bhumibol Adulyadej of Thailand to become the monarch with the second longest reign in history, having ruled for 70 years and 127 days. Liz Truss was chosen as her 15th British Prime Minister by her on September 6 at Scotland's Balmoral Castle. It was the only time in her reign that she did not receive a new Prime Minister at Buckingham Palace. There had never been so many prime ministers during a British reign. Although she undertook fewer public engagements as she became older and Prince Charles assumed more of her responsibilities, Elizabeth never intended to abdicate. She met Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, in June 2022. Welby said of her after their meeting that she came away thinking there is someone who has no fear of death, has hope in the future, knows the rock on which she stands, and that gives her strength. Elizabeth passed away peacefully in June 2022 at the age of 96, at 15:10 BST, with her children Charles and Anne at her side. She passed away in Scotland, and the news of her passing was made public at 18:30, launching Operation London Bridge and Operation Unicorn. The funeral service for a monarch had not been held at the Abbey since George II in 1760 until Elizabeth II became the first queen to be buried in a royal chapel. On September 19, she was given a state funeral at Westminster Abbey, the first funeral service for a monarch to be performed there since George II in 1760. The day was declared a holiday in several Commonwealth nations, and over 1 million people crowded the streets of downtown London. Elizabeth's 8 grandkids joined her children in keeping vigil around her coffin the following day. Because Elizabeth seldom ever gave interviews and kept her political beliefs to herself in public, nothing was known about them. She was renowned for having a strong sense of civic and religious obligation and for being serious about her coronation oath. She supported interfaith ties by participating in services with the traditional Church of England and the National Church of Scotland. Among the religious leaders she met with were 5 popes: Pius XII, John XXIII, John Paul II, Benedict XVI, and Francis. Throughout her reign, Elizabeth supported more than 600 organizations and charities, raising more than £1.4 billion for them. Her primary pastimes included riding horses and owning pets, particularly Pembroke Welsh corgis. She occasionally observed scenes of laid-back, informal home life with her family, and occasionally observed scenes of laid-back, informal home life. In conclusion, Elizabeth II played a significant role in the history of the British monarchy and had a strong sense of civic and religious responsibility. Her legacy has been formed by her legacy, the impact of her family, and the environment she lived in. Elizabeth II was presented as a dazzling fairy tale queen in the 1950s while she was in power. Elizabeth introduced new practices, such as the television documentary Royal Family and televising Prince Charles's investiture as Prince of Wales. Elizabeth's speeches were frequently criticized for sounding like priggish schoolgirls. But it was a time of hope and achievement after World War II, heralding a new Elizabethan age. By the conclusion of her reign, approximately 1/3 of Britons had seen or personally interacted with Elizabeth, and her wardrobe acquired a distinctive style that was more about purpose than fashion. The people and festivities of her Silver Jubilee in 1977 were really exciting. The public's disapproval of the royal family, however, grew in the 1980s as a result of media attention given to Elizabeth's children's personal and professional life. In response to public pressure, Elizabeth started paying income tax for the first time and opened Buckingham Palace to the public after her popularity hit a low point in the 1990s. Although republicanism enjoyed strong support in Britain, it was still a minority perspective, and Elizabeth herself enjoyed high levels of popularity. Instead of focusing on Elizabeth herself, criticism was directed at the monarchy as a whole and the behavior of her extended family. The death of Diana, Princess of Wales, marked the apex of public discontent with the monarchy, while Elizabeth's personal standing and public support for the monarchy recovered following her live televised broadcast to the entire world 5 days after Diana's passing. An indirectly elected head of state was preferred to the Australian monarchy's retention in a 1999 referendum on the subject. Elizabeth's popularity was widely credited by Republicans with ensuring the Australian monarchy's existence. Australia has deep affection for Elizabeth, according to Prime Minister Julia Gillard, who suggested delaying another monarchy referendum until after her reign. Strong support for the monarchy was shown in British polls in 2006 and 2007, and in 2012, Elizabeth's Diamond Jubilee year, her approval ratings reached 90%. Her son Andrew's relationships with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, his legal dispute with Virginia Giuffre amid allegations of sexual misconduct, and her grandson Harry and Meghan's departure from the working royal family and subsequent move to the United States brought her family under new scrutiny in the last few years of her life. This is Astrid Insight Lab. To receive notifications anytime we post new videos, kindly hit the like and subscribe buttons. Several well-known artists, including painters Pietro Annigoni, Peter Blake, Chinwe Chukwugo Roy, Terence Cuneo, Lucian Freud, Rolf Harris, Damien Hirst, Juliet Panet, and Taya Shan Skirian-Berg have depicted Elizabeth in various mediums. Cecil Beaton, Yusuf Karsh, Anwar Hussain, Annie Leibovitz, Lord Lichfield, Terry O'Neill, John Swannell, and Dorothy Wilding were notable photographers of Elizabeth. According to the yearly Gallup survey, she was still the third most admired woman in the world as of 2021.